Welcome to the 6th episode of Learn Codea by Making a Game. In this episode, we're going to focus on UI. And as you can see over here, we have this UI over here and another UI, which is the timer. So if we go and collect the coin over here, we will see that the coin counter goes up. And we see this timer is going up to 0 and it's almost going to reach 0. So if I go open up the console, you'll see that a printed thing comes out and it says timer done, so it's able to track the time and share if the timer is going to 0, and you see it's clamped to 0. That's one thing we're also going to do. So without wasting time, let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is open the project from last time. Before we get started, let's see how UI works in Codea. There are 3 parts to a UI: a size, pivot, and an anchor. The size is simple. It represents how big we want the UI to be in pixel size. The pivot is the reference point for positioning the UI. I'm going to show a little circle representing the pivot of this UI. The current pivot is 0.5 and 0.5. This represents the center of the UI. This is how we want the UI to be drawn from the center. We can change the pivot to be at 0, 0, meaning the bottom left of the UI. We can also change the position of the pivot to be 1, 1, so it can be the top right of the UI. So the numbers of the X and Y position just represents the percentage how far we want the UI to be positioned through. So if suppose we say 0, 1, it would be at the top left of the UI. The anchor is actually something interesting. We're going to use another example to demonstrate what it is. Anchors and Codeas represent what position relative to the parent do we want a UI to be rendered from. For this example, the child UI is in the center of its parent for both the X position and the Y position. We can also make the UI to be at the bottom left, or we could make the UI to be at the top right. So the anchor is just the position we want the UI to be positioned from. There are 3 types of UI we'll be using for this episode: an image, a text, and a VStack/HStack. Stacks in Codea allows us to position child entities adjacent to each other. The stack has spacing and padding around it. The next thing we're going to do is write the UIManager class. This class is going to be used to display all the UI we're going to see on the screen. Inside of the creator function, on the first line, we create a variable called score and score label. These are the result of a function called highText. This is the definition of the function. We're going to use this UI function to go and create that UI we saw at the beginning of the video, and we're going to use it to render the score and the timer. The first line of code of the function creates a UI. The way we create a UI is by calling the scene.canvas, and we create a child of the canvas. So each UI is a child of its parent, and in order to make the first UI, what we need to do is we need to get the original base UI, which is the canvas, attached to the scene, and we make a child of that, so that will create the base of the UI. Now what we're going to do is input the size, which we have in the parameter as the size of the UI base. Afterwards, we create an HStack, which is a horizontal stack, and what we do is we set the padding to 0 and the spacing to 0, so they just stack right next to each other. The reason why we use an HStack is because we want to put the first part to be the highlighted blue part and the next part to be the text area. Afterwards, we create the blue highlight by making it a child of the UI base, and we set the sprite to be a square and the size to be 10. That's how thick the blue highlight is going to be, and we set the color to be a blue color. Next, we create the text area, which is a child of the UI base. The sprite of the text area is going to be a square. The size will be the size of the parameters minus 10, and the color is going to be a black color with a slight transparency. Afterwards, we create the text object, which is a child of the text area. We set the anchor to stretch and stretch. So basically stretch, what it does is stretches to the size of the parent. So we want the size of this text to stretch through the whole size of the text area, and we set the size to 0. The reason why is that size in this case, since the anchor is stretch, is it's going to make a little offset based off that stretch. So we want to have no offset, so we set the size to 0. We then add a component called UI label, allowing us to display a text to the screen, and then we assign that label to a variable called label. We set the text of the label to be the string of the parameter, the font size of the label to be the font size of the parameter, and the font to be Futura, and the style to be bold because we want the text to be bolden, and we want to turn off the shadow. So what we do is we set the color to be transparent. Afterwards, we return the UI base and the label class of the component from the text object. If we go back to the creator function, we go get the score and we set the pivot to be 1, 1. Remember, the score is going to be the UI base. We also set the anchor to be the top right, and we also set the X and Y position to be -50. We're going to use the same function for the score to create the timer and the timer label, and we just set the parameters to be 0 and just the same thing as before, but the font size we're going to set to 40, and we're going to set the pivot instead to be 0, 1. We're going to anchor it to the top left and set the X position to be 50 and the Y position to be -50. Okay, let's go to the main file and let's paste this line of code, which creates the UI entity, the UIManager entity, and adds the component to it. And let's go and run it. And we'll see that we have two UIs, one over here and yellow over here. This is for the timer, and this one is for the score. But if we actually use the knight and go and get the coin, we see that nothing's happening, that they're both just, nothing is working. So what we want to do now is make both of these entities work. So that's what we're going to do next. Now we're going to go back to the coin spawner class, and we're going to paste these lines of code. And so this is an update function, and what we do is we're going to check first is nil, so not first means it's going to pass through this. So the first time the update passes, it's going to go through here, and what we're going to do is we're going to get the score label. The score label is this score label over here from the UI class. The way we do it is by writing this line of code. And now we're going to set first to true, meaning that we'll never repeat this again in the update function. And what we want to do is we're going to set the score text to be the score. Remember, we set the score a few episodes ago. So now we're going to run the project. And if we run the project and we elect the coin, we'll see that the score goes up, which is very good. So now what we want to do is we want to make the timer start working. So what we're going to do next is add a new component called timer, and this component will allow us to update the timer. In the creator function, the first variable we set is the time length. This is the length of time we want the timer to run for. We then set a variable called time length, which is basically the current time which we have right now. We then create a variable called onComplete function. This onComplete function will be called whenever the timer is done, and right now the onComplete function just prints timer done inside of the console. Finally, we set a variable called last time to be nil. We will use this variable to check if we should call the onComplete function. In the update function, we create a similar structure which we did in the coin spawner to check only the first time that the update runs, and we get the label. And we also get the start time. The start time will be set to the current time of the application, and the way we get the current time is by writing time.elapsed. Afterwards, we set the label text to be current time to string. Inside of that function, we calculate how much time we have left, and we convert it to the proper string format. In the first line of code, we calculate how much time we have left by taking the time length and subtracting it by the current elapsed time minus the start time. We don't want the time length variable to be less than 0, so we just clamp it to 0 if it is. So what we do next is get the minutes, seconds, and milliseconds of how much time is left. The way we calculate the amount of minutes we have is by taking the time left variable and dividing it by 60, and we just take the floor of that, and that will give the amount of minutes left. The way we calculate the amount of seconds is similar to the amount of minutes, but instead of dividing it by 60, we take the modulus of 60. The way we calculate the amount of milliseconds is by taking the time left and multiplying it by 100. Afterwards, we take the modulus of 100 and then we floor it. Afterwards, we format the string by using string.format. We put the minutes as decimals, and the seconds, we want to at least have two numbers. So the way we write that is 0, 2D, and this will allow us to have at least two numbers inside of the string. We want to do the same thing for the milliseconds, so we write the same thing and then we return the function. If we go back to the update function, we'll check if time left is equal to 0 and if the last time is not equal to 0. We'll set last time to be time left at the end of the function. So each time we reach this if statement, this is checking if time left is equal to 0, but we have not set time last to be equal to 0. And if that is so, then we call the onComplete function. Okay, that's very good. So what we're gonna do is we're actually gonna change this time length to 10, just for now. We'll change it back to 30 later on. And we're gonna go back to the main file, and we're gonna go paste this line of code you see over here. This is the line of code we're gonna add inside here. And what we're gonna do now is we're gonna run. And we see that there's a timer up here, which is very nice. And if we open this console up, and just when it's about to reach 0, you'll see it right here. See, timer done. See, it called the onComplete function just on time, and you'll see it's stayed at 0 since we clamped it at 0. So that's very good. Okay, that wraps up this video. In the next video, what we want to do is we're going to have a new game over screen. So whenever this timer reaches 0, we want to have a big game over screen, and we'll be able to restart the game. And we want the coin to reset and also the player to reset. So thank you for watching and have a good day. Also, please subscribe and have a good one.